Hi students, welcome to AP Environmental Science video 10 on ecological succession. So some objectives for you after watching this video, be able to compare and contrast primary versus secondary succession, what are the differences and similarities, and describe the general progression of succession, including the types of organisms and the number of organisms that are going to be present. So I'd like you to imagine for a moment what would happen to this street if people disappeared. And they never came back. So if you've ever watched any of the Life After People or anything like that, that's kind of what we're talking about here. So think about what would it look like after 1 year going all the way up to 1,000 years. So this is kind of what you would imagine probably to start. Now in this picture, we don't have buildings or anything like that, but we still have the concrete and cement. So after our first few years, we would have something called lichens that would grow. Lichens actually, and I'm going to put this up here for you, but we will go back to this picture. They don't require soil to form, and it is a mutualistic relationship between a fungi and an algae. So it's two things kind of in one. The algae photosynthesize and the fungi absorb the nutrients from rocks and hold water. So over time, they're going to be able to break down rock and secrete acids that will facilitate physical weathering. So we come back here, we've got lichens, they're wearing down the rock. Now that the rock has been able to be worn down and you're starting to form soil, you're gonna have moss that can grow. Moss is gonna be able to hold a lot of moisture so that grasses will now be able to colonize your area. Now you start to have sun-loving shrubs and weeds and bushes and small things like that. Eventually you will get small trees. Then we'll start to get larger trees as we continue on. And we'll start to have finally some shade tolerant trees, shades that can grow in, or trees that can grow in the shade. And our climax community, that's going to be the final kind of community, the nice forest, big, trees and stuff like that in the community. So after about 1,000 years, the city is going to look pretty much like a forest. You will still see some things that people put in there, but most of it will be, kind of decomposed and go back to what a natural forest system would look like. So what we're talking about here is primary and secondary succession. Primary succession is a very, very slow process because you don't have any soil. So you have to have things like lichen and bacteria that can break down the soil. And these things are called pioneer species. They're the first organisms that come in and colonize an area so that you can then start primary succession. So again, please make sure you know this part right here. No soil is very, very important to know. So here's what that would look like. Here's originally just bedrock and rain. Eventually you will get some of that rock that will start to disintegrate and chemically or mechanically weather down. We'll talk about weathering when we hit soil a little bit more. Now you actually start to have some soil form, and once you have soil, you can have things like grasses, trees, bushes, all that sort of stuff that can start to grow. And again, here is a picture of our community. So we have, again, starting out up here, rock, you have lichen, mosses. This is kind of the progression of what things look like. As you can see, they get larger typically as we go on in succession. Here at the end, you will see that yes, there are still grasses and weeds and mosses, but they're at a lower number because you don't have enough space for them anymore. So as larger things come in, it takes up more space, it takes up more water and nutrients. So you can't also have a ton of grasses and moss and bushes when you have these bigger trees down here. So a couple definitions that you need to know. Facilitation is when one species prepares the way for the next. So it, quote, facilitates another species. So an example of this might be a pine tree that provides enough shade that allows a oak, something that needs shade, to be able to grow. Interference is the opposite. It's when one species prevents another from being able to come up into an ecosystem. So maybe a grass is going to produce dense and thick mats so that seeds of trees that are falling are not going to be able to germinate. So that would be interference. So things that can restart succession. So you can have a forest fire in your forest. You can have a volcano erupt, logging, human activity, and you could even have an ice age or a glacier. Now, things that are going to make succession completely restart, meaning that you're going to go from a forest to having no soil, would be something like a volcanic event. So, a volcanic event would mean that you have to go back through the entire primary succession process. If you have a forest fire, you still have soil, so you're not starting from primary succession. You're starting from what we're going to call secondary succession in just a second. On rare occasions, you can also have a meteor event, like we know about with the dinosaurs, that can come and blast in an area. This is a Tunguska event in 1908. You can actually see the way that the trees are laid down was literally because they were blown over by this meteor. So this is the area that was not completely destroyed. But this is the effect that you can see. So very few trees were left standing in this area. So again, secondary succession, this is the most common one because very rarely do we have volcanic events in a lot of different places that's going to have to make us restart from primary succession. So most of the time we have things like a forest fire, logging, something like that, that's going to mean that we need to restart our community, but we're not restarting from bare rock. So this is where an ecosystem previously existed and soil is present this time. So maybe there's a hurricane, maybe there's a flood, an earthquake, whatever the natural disaster was, it did not restart us from bare rock. So again, regrowth is faster because there's seeds already in the soil, there's animals, there's nutrients. We don't have to start from scratch again. And our general progression is we kind of increase in succession over time. All of these different things are going to increase. So the number of species that we see is going to increase, which means our biodiversity increases. Total population in the community increases. Our biomass increases because we have large trees and things like that. And in general, our organic material is going to increase. And finally, our last community, we call this a climax community, is a final stable community with lots of trees and oaks and things like that. It does change some, but pretty much it's going to remain the same through time unless you end up having one of those events, a meteor blast, a hurricane, a volcanic eruption, any of those kinds of things. All right, bring your questions tomorrow.